Rural Americans deserve access to the best of what our country has to offer, especially health care. Across every state, every community, America's rural hospitals are the first line of defense, protecting our families, neighbors, and loved ones. No matter where you live, hospital care doesn't clock out. They're there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Each year, America's over 5,000 hospitals care for millions of patients, providing 24/7 emergency care, delivering babies, cancer treatments, and other life-saving care that patients rely on. Behind every one of those patients are doctors, nurses, and caregivers working tirelessly to keep people healthy and safe. Hospitals are our community's lifelines. They employ our neighbors and keep our families healthy. But now, some in Congress are threatening access to care. Tell Congress, protect patient care to keep America strong. Don't cut rural health care.
This is the 77 WABC minicast.
We are back, folks. This is the More Money Show. I'm economist Steve Moore. By the way, I hope you are all getting our Unleash Prosperity hotline about 5 mornings a week. We will email that to you for free. All you have to do is go to unleashprosperity.com and click on hotline, and we will send it to you 5 mornings a week. I know a lot of the people in the White House are reading it. Members of Congress are reading it. CEOs of companies are reading it, and you should be reading it too. So go to unleashprosperity.com and sign up for the hotline, which is absolutely free. I mentioned at the start of the show that I was going to have on my friend and a guy who I so greatly admire and has done such a great service for our country. That's Mark Meadows. Mark Meadows, you all know, served for I think a year and a half or 2 years, I forget how long it was, as Donald Trump's chief of staff in his first term. Mark Meadows also served as a congressman from the great state of North Carolina, and he and I and Larry Kudlow and Art Laffer really were pretty instrumental in getting that first draft done of the tax cut. And without you, Mark Meadows, I don't know if we could have gotten that tax bill done. So anyway, thank you so much for joining, Mark.
No, Steve, great to be with you, and you're very gracious in giving me credit, but it was actually you and Larry Kudlow and Art on the back of a napkin that says, listen, if we can do X, Y, and Z and get that passed. And I looked at it and said, well, that should be easy. And the next thing you know, not only was it signed into law, but it is now permanent. Really thanks to you and so many of your friends. You are bold enough to say this makes sense, and now Americans across the country are benefiting from those tax cuts.
Well, you were the one who, after we had that famous lunch together where we drafted out a plan, you were the one who got in touch with the president, and he said, yeah, let's go with this. And we got about 80%, maybe more, of what we wanted, which is pretty amazing in politics, and it would not have happened without you, Mark. Okay, so we've got about 10, 12 minutes, and I know how busy you are, so thanks. First of all, very quickly, tell people about Conservative Partnership Institute, how they can get a hold of you guys and get your amazing material.
Well, obviously, we're not necessarily a think tank. We're more of an action tank on Capitol Hill, the Conservative Partnership. And as you know, we work with a number of conservative members, both in the House and the Senate, on a regular basis. Mm-hmm. And so I'm a senior partner there. But the big key, I think, and the tax bill is one example of that, kind of behind the scenes on the One Big Beautiful Bill when it was stalled. It was actually working with the Speaker and with the White House and everybody to try to get things done. So we try to make sure that the bad things stop and the good things get going, which is a full-time job in Washington, D.C.
It is, and you guys were amazing on both. You were amazing both in getting the first bill passed in 2017, and then Conservative Partnership Institute, which let's see, it's you and who else is involved in that
so
institute?
It's me, Senator DeMint, the former senator from South Carolina, Ed Corrigan, Rachel Bovar, and Wesley Denton, and those, and obviously they've got so much experience in the Senate, and this everybody's talking about the standing filibuster and the Save America Act right now. A lot of that came from Rachel Bovard and Ed Corrigan before it now is the thing that everybody's talking about. But since this is about more money, one of the things that I think your listeners ought to know is about the capital gains rate and lowering it and adjusting it for inflation. That idea, obviously, is something you and I've talked about. But Ted Cruz is now pushing for it and said, that's what the president can do without having to pass legislation.
It's a big deal. You're right. We think the president can do it unilaterally. Jeff Yass and I had a piece in the Wall Street Journal a few weeks ago saying, let's index it, and at least let's index. This is one of our ideas, Mark, and I know our listeners have heard me talk a little bit about this, which is, one of the reasons housing costs have been high is because people are locked into their homes because of the capital gains tax. So we said, at least let's index capital gains for the sale of a house so older people can move out of their homes and maybe move into a, golf community or, assisted living. And then, young people could buy up those houses. But right now people can literally not afford to sell their house because they pay so much tax. So it's incredibly unfair and bad for the economy. Thank you for mentioning that. Okay. What is it like, Mark Meadows? And now, we have a war going on right now with Iran. Hopefully this will be over in less than a month. It looks like the military is doing an amazing job over there. But you've worked side by side with Donald Trump. And by the way, is it true this guy is working 16 hours a day?
Yeah, at least 16 hours a day. Actually, he's working more than that. I feel for Susie Wiles because, quite frankly, I didn't get any sleep the entire time. And especially when you've got stuff going on like this, you would think that the president is just myopically focused on one thing. But that's not the way that this president thinks. He'll be dealing with Iran, and I agree with you. Hopefully, it is strategic strikes that get over with in a matter of weeks, not months. But even with that, he can be focused on that and saying, okay, well, how are we going to make sure that we get capital gains tax down? How do we make sure that we advance legislation and make sure that the government's working for the American people? And he'll watch things. He does say, Steve, that TiVo is the greatest invention known to man. So he'll watch programs through the middle of the night. And as his chief of staff, I would get calls. The earliest or latest that I ever recall getting called was at 3:19 in the morning. And he called me and said, Mark, did I wake you? I said, no, sir, I had to get up to answer the phone anyways. And so but he would give me a to-do list. And then at 7:30 in the morning, he said, well, how are you coming on that list that I gave you last night? I said, well, sir, nobody in D.C. is actually open. They haven't even come into work yet. But that's the kind of president that we have in the Oval Office right now, and candidly, it's why the American economy is really doing as well as it is, because he is somebody that understands business and understands what moves the levers of power.
Well, it's very funny because, I love having you've been on my show before, and oftentimes I have Mick Mulvaney. I'm sure you know Mick, and you and him have exactly the same stories. And Mick said after working for him for, I think he was in about a year, he was just so completely exhausted. He said, I can't do this anymore. But it must be amazing working with someone who works that hard, tirelessly. And by the way, I don't always agree with Donald Trump. I agree with him probably 80% of the time. But I've always felt, Mark, even when I disagreed with him, I'm not a big fan of tariffs, as you know, but I've always felt like in his heart, every decision he makes is, will this make America great? Will it put America first? And I think that's what every president should do. You've been with him in the Oval Office a lot more than I have. Would you agree with that assessment?
Well, not only would I agree with that assessment, but here's the interesting thing, and you pointed out, and so you and Larry Kudlow and a few others were very open about your feeling on tariffs. But he's also one that's willing, knowing that you've got a different opinion than he does, he'll bring you in and have you argue it with other people. And that's the thing that people don't understand is that he may not agree with you, but it's not like, okay, I don't agree with Steve Moore, so he's not invited to the Oval anymore.
No,
you know, in fact, I would be surprised that you don't have a hard pass that allows you to get in any time that you want.
Well, I just saw the president a few weeks ago. He's just on top of his game right now. No question about it, Mark. And so, we now have a situation where if we can get this war, over with and victorious, as we all want to see, we could bring peace and prosperity to the Middle East. It looks like we're doing that in Venezuela. One of the issues that I brought up with the president, he asked me about Cuba, and I said, look, Mr. President, if you could liberate Cuba, it would be like the Hong Kong of the Western Hemisphere if you just gave these people freedom. I think he wants his legacy to be a guy who spread freedom throughout the world.
Well, without a doubt, freedom always works, and freedom, candidly, you don't have to look any further than the peninsula of Korea. And so South Korea, versus North Korea, you can look at the lights on a Google map. One is the 9th greatest economy in the world. The other is the 125th greatest economy in the world. And freedom, is a line, and you can see it, from aerial shots, but it's not just there. It's literally liberating Cuba would be a huge aspect, not just for many of my former friends and patriots who came from Cuba, but he's done it now in Venezuela. I do believe that Cuba is next, but can you imagine if we unleash the prosperity? Pun intended, unleash the prosperity in those countries as well as the Middle East. Listen, great economies make for peaceful neighbors, and I think it's something the president understands, and I'm looking forward to seeing the results of his actions.
So, Mark, I agree with your assessment entirely, and I just thank God every night that this man is president. Any final thoughts about him? We got about 45 seconds left, Mark Meadows.
Yeah, so really continue to focus on a second reconciliation package that maybe the White House is not going to talk about, but I do think that we can get tax relief and the economy continue to be stimulated. Yep. You and Jeff, you're right on the capital gains thing. Let's keep talking about it.
Well, Mark, you are a national asset. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I hope you'll come on again. Folks, this is the More Money Show, and we will be right back.
If you're looking to create, grow, and sustain your wealth, download and subscribe to the Pain Points of Wealth podcast at BeBullish.com with Bob, Ryan, and Chris Payne. It's your podcast for market insights, money tips, and real talk on the economy. Download and subscribe at BeBullish.com.